Good evening. It's nice to see so many people here tonight. And I want to welcome you on behalf of the Barrington Area Library and the National Alliance on Mental Health Barrington Area Chapter. We're delighted that you're here, and we want to welcome you as we look into what to do in a mental health crisis. I'm Terry Latter, and I'm the Program Director for the NAMI-Barrington Area Chapter's Family to Family program, and tonight I'm pleased to be your moderator. I want to spend a moment talking about the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI, as it's also called, is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans who are affected by mental illness and their families. It advocates for effective prevention, diagnosis, treatment, support, research, and recovery that improve the quality of life for those affected by these illnesses. The Barrington Area Chapter is one of 22 NAMI chapters here in Illinois, and our mission is to improve the quality of life for individuals and families affected by mental illness through support, education, and advocacy. So let's get started. Our goal tonight is to help us to learn how to utilize the support system that is available to us when we are faced with a mental health crisis. We're going to talk about communications and intervention techniques that we can use to de-escalate a stressful or perhaps even violent situation. We're going to talk about how to have the best possible outcome when you dial 911. How the legal system can assist us when our family member refuses to seek treatment for mental illness. How to maximize the ER visit and treatment programs. And where to turn for sustainable assistance to minimize future mental health crises for our family members. So that's a lot of information for us to cover. We are delighted that we have 6 experts here from different disciplines who will be helping us. Each of them will spend about 5 minutes talking about how best to manage a mental health crisis from their perspective. We've provided everyone that's come in, we hope, with a couple of note cards so that if you have questions that occur to you as you're listening, you can write them down. If you have a particular panelist that you'd like to address your question to, just put their name on that card. And after the final speaker, we'll collect all the cards and then we'll open it up for a question and answer period. And now it is my honor to introduce our distinguished panel. And I'm going to work to my left here. Ray, maybe you can raise your hand when I call your name here. So Ray Piagentini has been a middle school and high school counselor for 38 years. He is the past president of the Illinois School Counselors Association and a current member of the Lake County Opioid Task Force. He is in the process of establishing a place that will be dedicated to suicide prevention in our community. Dr. Denise Casey is the founder and director of the Barrington Behavioral Health and Wellness. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and holds certification in alcohol and drug abuse counseling, clinical hypnosis, and cognitive therapy. Previously, she has been on the medical staff of Lutheran General Hospital and the teaching staff at Northeastern Illinois University. Corey Moschberger is a licensed clinical social worker at Barrington Behavioral Health and Wellness. She holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois at Chicago. And she's an active member of the National Association of Social Workers. Corey works with a variety of ages and clinical diagnoses, including depression and anxiety. Sergeant Michael Hansen has been a member of the Barrington Police Department for the past 18 years and currently serves as a watch commander. As a certified crisis intervention trained officer, Michael has received intensive training on recognizing and addressing individuals in the community who are dealing with mental health issues or other behavioral disabilities. Kevin Burrell is a Lake County Assistant State's Attorney for the last 9 years. Since 2011, his duties have included assisting families and medical professionals who are seeking involuntary commitments and involuntary administration of psychotropic medications, for loved ones or for their patients. Kevin has been involved with the 19th Judicial Circuit's specialty courts, one of which is Mental Health Court. And Dr. Paul Skiba is the clinical director of the Adult Partial Hospitalization Program and the Intensive Outpatient Program Services at Amita Health Alexian Brothers Behavioral Health Hospital. As a clinical psychologist, he has worked in psychiatric inpatient and outpatient programs for 30 years. He has a private practice which specializes in people with multiple hospitalizations and multiple diagnoses and challenges. So help me welcome our panel. So right now we're going to get started with Ray.
Thank you all for coming. Looking out in the stands, Miss Longo, I had her children, I was blessed to have hers as a counselor. Where's Miss Peters? She's around, I had 3 of hers, and she just told me a story about her youngest one. Awesome. Miss Flanagan, the face of Barrington High School when she comes in. And I have to embarrass this one gentleman. He and I played high school basketball together. Yes, in 1971 at Weber High School in Chicago. Tom Mott. Thank you all for coming. My job as a counselor is to try to help your child. Again, if you have older children, it's not meant for you. They ask me to talk about the high school components. Develop a partnership with the counselor. Be collaborative. If you have any information, give them and let them share. There's some things I brought in the back which I won't read from, but what to do with the early intervention in a crisis and mental health crisis. First of all, and again, because I'm on the same panel with them, but I work with Sergeant Jensen. Great with kids. Get those people into your house right away if you have a problem, they'll help. I'm at the front line, we're sort of like the grunts. We get them to the experts, Ms. Casey and Dr. Skiba down at the end. They get them all the specific therapeutic help that they need. As the young lady said, I'm opening up a spot in Barrington where it's called Hope House. Any student who has a difficult time early in the morning, please stop in. I'll be open from 5 o'clock in the morning till 7:30 because Barrington boys in the past have committed suicide between 5:30 and 6:15 when they step in front of a train. So I'm going to be here at that 5 o'clock time. If anybody has that issue, come on in if we can save a life. It's like standing at a post. Anybody here in the military? You know, if nothing happens, it's been a good night. But if something happens, you're ready and you're going. So we'll have that available for students every day that they're school, Monday through Friday. And I'm not here promoting it, just telling you what we have. And then for veterans on Tuesday and Thursday night. Because my son was a veteran. And I lost him 3 years ago to a heroin overdose. While he was in the military, he got all the drugs he needed, even though that wasn't good for him, it was heavy opioids. And then when he got out, he couldn't get it from the VA, and he went somewhere else, and he passed. And we just lost a Barrington kid about 4 days ago, an older student who he had due to heroin overdose. He was clean for 4 years, and then he went back to the same doses he was using when he stopped, and then his heart stopped immediately. So, you're in a great community, Barrington, Lake Zurich, all these places. You people love your kids, and you want the best for them. It's tough times to live in. We all saw what happened the other night, but we have families that are moving quite a bit because of the corporate area. A lot of the kids don't have roots. I'm born and raised Sicilian Italian in Chicago. Born in Louisiana, came up when I was 1. My grandmother lived downstairs, we lived in the middle. My grandfather had 9, so we bought three flats, and we all lived together. And we thought everybody spoke Italian. And then, you know, what we consider you guys, you were the Metagones, which is Italian for like white people. We call ourselves white people. So we had a real good family support system that helped. We had people in our life who just had unconditional love. My grandmother, no matter what we did, we burned the school down. That's okay, have some spaghetti. And a lot of the kids nowadays are missing that. So when I evaluate a student coming in, I'm directed to the point. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Or if they just give me a little hint and a little dance a little bit, I go through the S, social, what do they do for friends? Or what do they do for a good time? And who's the nurturing person in their family? Who can they run to when in times of distress and say, I need to sit down and talk? I, intellectual, are they challenged in school? Are they overwhelmed, or the worst part, are they underwhelmed? Are they just coasting and getting A's and they're not really being challenged? E, emotional, who else do they talk to? Is there a holy person in their life? A rabbi, a priest, a Lutheran minister, whatever. Are recreational, what do they do for fun? Too many kids in this generation growing up now, what do they do for fun? They're texting everybody who's in the next room, you know, so I don't get yelled. Or they're playing those video games, which is studies have shown, 1 minute, okay, that's ER, recreational, and S, spiritual. I'm a big, deep believer that you need spirituality in life to try to bring everything together. And not any particular religion. I went to a Catholic school, but I've been trained by some of the best psychologists around. Some are sitting at this table. But I also been teaching on the Indian reservation for 25 years, and I've been around some incredible medicine people there that have taught me a lot about our suicide program. This is a card, grab it on the way out, give it to your child. If they or their friend has any inkling of suicide, fold it up, put it in a wallet. There's some numbers on there, but get that information to the school's counselor. Time's up. Thank you for your attention.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Denise Casey, and the founder of Barrington Behavioral Health and Wellness. Just really pleased to be here tonight. Ray, thank you for starting us off. And you mentioned some really heavy stories, and I think probably for most of us here, there is some heavy story that's touched our life and what's drawing us to this program tonight. So we're supposed to answer a few questions for you in terms of how to begin to recognize a mental health crisis when it's about to occur. And so it's kind of a, all depends answer in terms of which diagnosis are we dealing with. But I always say to people that you want to try to, as soon as you begin to see symptoms of a fever, you want to take that Tylenol right away when the temperature's 99. If you wait until it's 104, you're in the ER, right? So with mental health, you can think of it conceptually the same way. How do we begin to recognize when it's at 99 instead of waiting until 104? So knowing what the baseline is, kind of what's the norm for that particular person? How do they normally operate in school, at work, with family, in their relationships and their daily habits? When you start to see that destabilize, the antenna should go up. Are they hanging around with different people? Are they working too much, working too little? Are they eating too much, eating too little, sleeping too little, sleeping too much? So for example, if somebody has a bipolar diagnosis, if they're up all night and not sleeping, that should be a red flag. Then you want to find out, are they taking their medications? If they're skipping doses, or they're not taking it, or they don't like the side effects, that's another red flag. So now the temperature's gone from 99 to 100, perhaps. If they begin to speak rapidly or exceptionally slowly, there's another red flag. If they're isolating, pulling away from family and friends, another red flag. And so when you get an early intervention with mental health, it might be call a therapist, talk to a family member, find that safe person to turn to. Might be get to a psychiatrist, do a med adjustment, but if we wait till 104, we might be calling the police, we might be going to Alexian Brothers. So it's trying to learn the patterns of that person specifically and be able to recognize when you start to see the early subtle signs of change. And I'll turn it to Corey now, who's going to talk a little more.
Hi, thanks for having us. So de-escalating it when it does get to a crisis point is a tricky part of it. I have mental health illness in my immediate family as well, and I know one of the things that happens most frequently is everybody enters the crisis, right? So something happens and a loved one is suddenly in a crisis, which may or may not be a real crisis. And so the first step in de-escalating is really assessing, is this a crisis that we need to handle immediately, or we just need to problem solve here? Right? Because when my sister leaves her keys to her car and she can't get to work and I'm in Florida, she calls me to fix that. And she's in a panic, that's not a crisis. Right? We can all deal with that. So just assessing that. And in order to be able to do that, you have to stay calm yourself. But remember that their crisis doesn't have to be your crisis. And we practice this as clinicians as well. So, just kind of assess the situation. And then you want to manage the crisis with calm. To stay as calm as you can, to keep your voice low, to keep your mannerisms low. You don't want to add any stimulation when someone's already in a bit of a frenzy. And that can be really challenging when you're emotionally involved with someone and it's scary. Of course, the most important thing is evaluate safety. If they are at risk for harming themselves or harming someone else or in harm's way, that's when we need to take immediate action, and it may be the police or a behavioral health hospital. Or sometimes a therapist can start in a crisis moment. But that becomes your first priority. Once you've eliminated, they're safe, they're okay. Now, how do we sort of talk them down? What can we do? And remembering that we can't control anyone else, right? They have to get to a point where they can manage it themselves, we can keep them safe, help them feel protected, help them feel loved and cared for, know that I'm here. And they may have to kind of go through whatever cycle they go through, again, diagnosis dependent and action dependent on what they need to do. And then we were also asked to mention, how do you work with a counselor or a therapist when you don't have permission? And I would say, call the counselor. The counselor can't tell you anything, but you can tell them anything. And that's really helpful for us as counselors to know where you're coming from, but also really helpful for you to vent and to process. And oftentimes we can give you some very generic information about someone who has a similar diagnosis. You might try these types of techniques. We can give you some tips to the trade, and that can be really helpful as well.
And we do collaborate a lot with family members. I've learned from my work in addictions that I only get to listen to the story, so I really do need to speak with the family members, or I need to at least get the information. So if there's not a release sign, I have a voicemail, anything to be left there, and then I discriminate in informing the patient or client about that information as necessary. But if somebody's saying, I'm fine, and they just were at home saying I'm suicidal, that's a big difference. So we need the information. And we work a lot with families to help them debrief and help them manage their own emotions. And we work with families in crisis all the time. But some of the symptoms and recognizing symptoms that I was suggesting is get to know whatever the diagnosis is and know what the symptomology is in that diagnosis so that you can train your eyes to see what we're trained to see, those earlier, more subtle symptomologies.
Okay, thank you so much. We're going to move down to Sergeant Jensen.
Hi, I'm Mike Hansen, and I'll apologize right now. I spent the weekend in Minnesota cheering for my favorite football team. Again, with me now, and the voice is still recovering. So if you'll bear with me, but I applaud all of you for being here tonight. This is something in my 18 years in law enforcement we've really seen an uptick and a growth of is the mental health crisis. And when I got hired, the old timers, as we referred to them, always said, what nobody knows is that you're going to be the first line of defense for everything. You're going to be a social worker, you're going to be a teacher, you're going to be a pastor, you're going to be a nurse, you're going to be, and that really has held true. But what law enforcement has finally started to figure out is to train the officers to handle those mental health crises that are becoming more and more what we get called to. And one of the things I'll get asked at a party or any place where someone meets me and finds out that I'm in law enforcement is, what is the call that you guys see the most? And it used to be, well, we were, it was heavily the drug calls, early 90s or late 90s, early 2000s. Heroin was terrible in this area. We were seeing that a ton. And then it was just a ton of domestic disputes. This area would see a lot. Now it is constantly, on a nightly basis, dealing with someone who is in mental crisis. And as a state, we've closed many of our hospital beds. We don't have room for them, or we're not caring for them. And so it has become an issue that, as a community, we really are dependent upon you to be our eyes and ears, to call us. I grew up in the 80s. 911 was a no-no. You don't call 911 because it's not an emergency, unless it's an emergency. That is how you get a hold of the police. Nobody knows what Barrington's police department phone number is. Nobody knows what Arlington Heights Police Department phone number is. If you need the police, you call 911. That is the most acceptable thing you can do. And the only thing we want is as much information as you can give us before we get there. Some houses we're returning to on weekly basis, sometimes nightly basis, depending on the week. We have a lot of the information. If it's the first time, any safety information you can give us, the better, or you're giving to the dispatch before we get there. And then once we arrive, you've obviously reached your wit's end when you call us. And then it's time to just let us step in and do what we've been trained to do. So I hope tonight will instill some confidence that we aren't just walking into this blind, like, I don't know what to do. We're not looking at each other with no idea what to do next. And what I would encourage each and every one of you to do is, if you do have a family member that is in mental crisis, I get the privilege of being one. And I think what these ladies were saying is you need to be making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Self-care is huge, and if you're not doing that, you're not going to be able to manage that situation before we're called into it. And then once we get there, it's very hard for you to give us the information that we need because you're just not at 100%. So we really want to encourage, it is a stigma to have someone that is to be struggling with a mental illness. It's a stigma that to seek professional help for yourself, to talk to someone. If I could do one thing for the mental health crisis, I would erase that stigma and just recognize that if you had cancer, you would seek treatment for it. If you have a family member that has cancer, you're probably, when I lost my mother-in-law to cancer, we all went as a family to deal with that. We need to reach out to the resources that are available to us. And it's certainly not money any of us want to be spending probably to spend that money on, but if your car is broken down, you're going to do something for your car, yourself, you need to be doing it for yourself. I can't stress that enough. We need to be caring for ourselves so we can care for the loved one in our lives that's struggling with mental illness as well. And I think one of the things that I just want to throw out tonight, this is your opportunity. I used to tell kids all the time in the high school when I go to classes, please, I've never heard a question that's stupid or dumb, and I find that a lot of times people want to talk to the police, they don't know how, they don't know if they can ask the question. Please ask me any question that you have, because if we can help you at all, we would love to do that. So thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you.
So I am an assistant state's attorney in the Lake County State's Attorney's Office, which means I'm calling from the exact opposite corner of Lake County, which is in Waukegan. So if you live in Lake County, and I know this area is kind of, there's like 3 different counties that really kind of intersect. If you live in Lake County, Michael Nierheim is your state's attorney, and I'm one of his assistants. He has, I think we have around 75 attorneys in our office. Around 10 of us are in the civil division of the state's attorney's office, and part of what we do is mental health commitments. Now, if you live in McHenry County, Pat Keneally is your state's attorney. If you live in Cook County, Kim Fox is your state's attorney. And they similarly have assistant state's attorneys who do this type of work. What we do in this context is a person calls our office and they're saying, I'm dealing with a person, usually a family member, often a friend, and I don't know what to do with them. They are mentally ill and they won't go to the hospital. And so what we can assist with is getting the person to a hospital to be evaluated with respect to their mental illness and whether they need a longer term of commitment. There's a standard for that, and that is if the person, as a result of a serious mental illness, is a threat of physical harm to themselves or others, then they can fit this standard. And so it does have to be physical harm. Now there's one other aspect of this, and which is if a person cannot care for their basic needs. That's rare. We do see it occasionally because it's a pretty high standard. The person doesn't have to actually be catatonic, but close. Unfortunately, the way that the law works a person has to truly be a threat to themselves or others to be involuntarily brought to a hospital. Because that's what we're talking about, is a person against their will being brought to the hospital. When a person calls our office, the first thing we're saying is, well, have you asked the person, or have you pursued any other way of trying to get the person to see a psychiatrist? Sometimes that's not feasible. Sometimes family members just know that's not going to work, and we completely understand that. So what this process involves is usually a pretty long phone call where we're asking all kinds of details about the mental health history of this person, whether they've been hospitalized before, if they have a current doctor, if you know what type of medications they have. Sometimes it hasn't gone that far. Sometimes you just know something is wrong and the person won't do anything about it. And we deal with those situations too. So the next step in our process is we'll have the person who's calling us come into our office, meet with us. If it's in Lake County, you gotta come all the way up to Waukegan. And we assist you in if we agree, basically, that this person meets that standard of being a threat of physical harm to themselves or others, it doesn't have to be homicidal or suicidal. Certainly is in some circumstances, but even just trending that way, a person getting physical or making threats that scare you, that's most likely meeting the standard if it's a result of their mental illness or what you think it is. So we assist you in filling out some paperwork. We walk down to a judge, to a courtroom, usually right that day. It's a very quick process if it's something you decide that you want to go forward with. It's usually the same judge, but we're familiar with all the judges that it could be in front of, and we provide the paperwork to the judge. Sometimes the judge, he or she will ask questions, but I've done dozens and dozens and probably hundreds at this point of these. I've never had one denied by a judge. That doesn't mean that they're not scrutinizing them, but you know, they usually trust that we've screened them pretty well. And frankly, that people are doing these for a good reason. You know, to get the person, a loved one, a family member, a friend, the help that they need. And so what that does is the judge signs an order that directs the sheriff's office, the Lake County Sheriff, to take a squad car, go to where the person is. They're great at this, at getting the person into the squad car. Often it does actually, although the person's not being arrested, this isn't producing a criminal history. Often, for everyone's safety, the person will be placed in handcuffs and put in the squad car, again, for everyone's safety, because we're dealing with a really acutely serious situation, and brought to a hospital. Now, in Lake County, that's usually Vista West, which is a psychiatric hospital in Waukegan. Another option in Lake County is, if you have veterans benefits, is the VA in Chicago, which my impression prior to being in the state's attorney's office was that the VA was not a great place. I've learned it's the exact opposite. It's a really extraordinary facility. The Level Healthcare Federal Healthcare Center. Now, there's one other mental health, what's considered a mental health facility, an enclosed locked psych ward in Lake County, and that is in Highland Park. It's Highland Park Hospital. That's specifically for adolescents. I think it goes up to 24, age 24 or so. That doesn't mean those are the only options. Sometimes we're able to get a person to, we've gotten people to Evanston, we've gotten a person to Rush before, we've gotten a person to Alexian Brothers before, but usually those are the hospitals, at least to begin with, that we're dealing with. Sometimes Elgin as well, if there are insurance issues, which there often are, but usually the hospitals are working, you know, trying their best to work with people. I'm happy to take any questions as the night goes on. Two things I definitely don't want to forget. One, there's pamphlets over there. I know that a lot of what I'm saying is very dense and, you know, saying legal standards and describing court processes that you might not be familiar with. It's all in here, I promise. My kids would not approve because there are no pictures. It's really just there's a lot of information here, as well as websites that I can pretty much guarantee would be helpful to you. The first one on there is the DHS website. Now, I don't represent, I'm not an attorney general. I don't represent the state of Illinois or work for the state of Illinois. I work for the county. But they've got great resources on there, including some of the forms that I was referring to that get filled out. So happy to take any questions as the night goes on.
Thank you.
Harry, 5 minutes, really?
Hi, my name is Paul, and thank you for having me. And I think of you as the wisdom keepers. You know, we as treatment people, been warning camera person, I move, my kids sit still. And you're the wisdom keepers. You're the one that has been through these experiences. And so what I want to do before I start my talk is just walk you through a skill or a tool or a strategy. So just take a moment and notice your butt in the chair. And notice your back in the chair. Notice your feet on the floor. Take a moment and look around the room. There's a Ted Barrington area screen over here. There's a clock on the wall there. There's a chubby guy in an orange shirt over here. But just take a moment and look around the room. We're going to be going into questions in a little bit. And one of the things the brain will do as we dig into different questions is it will wander into some of the experiences that you've had in the past that may have been painful. And so what I ask you to do is that if you notice that start happening as you dig into the details of how do I help my family member or how do I help myself, come back into the room. The skill is called grounding or centering. But make sure that you use that skill if you notice yourself drifting into a memory. Okay, so that's the thing. And then 5 minutes, oh my gosh. So there's 3 things I want to talk about really fast. One, as Sergeant Mike was talking about, it is so important that you communicate with the police. And there's 2 different tools you can use for that. One is smart911.com. Smart911.com. Some of the police departments are using it. I know some of the sheriff's department, Cook County Sheriff's Department is using it. You can go onto that website, and there's a handout over there on it. And I'm not selling it. That's not the purpose of it. You can go in there and you can say, here is me and I have diabetes. Or here is me and I have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, whatever. But you can put information about you into that database so that if a 911 call is made and police are on the way, they get that data. Right? So that's one way to do that. Now, not all police departments are using smart911.com, but a sergeant is saying, so then please be in touch with your police social worker. Please be in touch with your police department and give them as much information as you can. One of the things we all have is, the psychology terms, grounding, centering, ERBs. And ERBs are behaviors that we do when we're in a particular mood. We all have these, or EDBs, emotion-driven behaviors. When I feel sad, I want to do this. When I feel mad, I want to do this. When I feel scared, I want to do this. So one of the things you really want to pay attention to is, for you or your family member, when a crisis starts to unfold, what's that behavior that starts to happen, right? One of my clients that I work with, his automatic reaction when he felt fear was he ran into the kitchen and he grabbed the largest steak knife that was in the kitchen, right? Now the family knew that, so they knew not to react. But imagine if a police department doesn't have that information and they walk into that situation versus if they know Bob, when he gets really upset, he runs into the kitchen and he grabs a knife. So again, smart911.com, as well as contact the police social worker, contact the police department, and give them as much information as possible. It helps de-escalate the situation, so hopefully you don't have to land up in an emergency room. Right? And that's the goal, is to get things calmed down, so you can see Denise and her crew, right? And get things calmed down so you don't need the hospitalization. Sometimes things continue to escalate and you need the hospital situation, right? And one of the biggest frustrations I'll see that happens with families is that they will call 911, friend, brother, sister, wife, cousin, son, daughter, goes to the emergency room and then is let go. And a half hour ago, things were not good. Things were not good at all. Things were actually downright scary. So one of the things I left over there is something called a petition. One of the things anybody can fill out, if you're 18 or older, is this thing called a petition. And it's a legal document that says, this is what I observed in my household. So literally you put on 10/3 at 7:40, my son said this, or my daughter did this, or my mom said that. And then when 911 shows up, the police have that document. The paramedics have that document, and they can take it to the emergency room. Right? Now, there's no guarantee that somebody's going to be admitted, but having that petition can be really, really helpful in terms of being able to have additional data. So the emergency room physician now has it. The emergency room nurse now has that data. The crisis worker that is going to be meeting with your family member or friend has that data. And they can use that data to call a psychiatrist and say, I have this petition that indicates this person is saying they talked about killing themselves 45 minutes ago, or they talked about hurting somebody else 45 minutes ago, or there's this steady progression of being unable to care for themselves, where they're not showering, they're getting sick. And so that that petition can be really, really helpful to the emergency room in helping kind of tip the scale in terms of somebody being able to get admitted. Okay? And again, ground, because I know as I talk about this stuff, it sometimes can bring back memories. The last thing I want to talk about is I left a handout over there called levels of care. There are many, many, many different levels of care. So there's the psychiatrist, of course, you hear about. There's the therapist that you hear about. And there is inpatient that you hear about. But I want you to know there's a lot of services that are out there and available. There's housing that's available. There's housing with therapy that's available, commonly called TLP or transitional living programs. There are group homes that are available if you're looking at some kind of housing. If you're more interested in intensive services, there's something called partial hospitalization program, where somebody is in treatment for 30 hours per week. Or there's something called intensive outpatient programs, where people are in therapy for about 12 hours per week, right? And then there also is the amazing support services, NAMI, DBSA, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, right? But it doesn't end there. There also is the community mental health centers that are out there. Alexian Center for Mental Health is one of many that are out there. There also is DuPage Services. There also is Lake County Services. There's also Rosecrans out in the McHenry area. They saved us. We went 6 weeks back in 2016 without one psychiatrist that took public aid. Rosecrans stepped in and helped us, and now they've become the community mental health services for McHenry County. I live in Huntley. So we're so appreciative about that. So in part of the community mental health services, not only do they offer like psychiatrists and therapists and that kind of thing, they also offer vocational services. Right? So helping with job interviews, job applications. Some of them even have job coaches at particular sites. There also are education. So, you know, with the Alexian Center, they have a specific grant with Harper where you're able to go and actually take classes. Right? So just know, because it can be very, very frustrating, where you feel like you hit this dead end and there are no other services out there. And it's, you know, I feel like part of our job here in mental health is to be an ambassador, to let you know the variety of services that are out there. And always feel free to, you know, swing by and give me a call or whatever. I'll gladly help you in any way that I can. So again, one, police. Really letting the police know as much information as possible. That in itself can de-escalate the situation a lot. 2, the petition, right? And then 3, know that there's a variety of services out there, from really intensive to really helping somebody move forward, helping somebody heal, and helping somebody grow. All right, take good care of yourself.
That was 5 minutes, you did it.
It's a miracle.
Thank you to all of you. I know I was making notes up here because I was learning things. So I hope some of this was new to you as well. I'm going to ask everybody, if you've been writing questions down, let's start passing questions to the ends of these sections, and some of our assistants here will be picking them up. To get us started though, I have a couple of questions. I'm going to start by asking Sergeant Hansen. Sometimes our family members who might be having a bipolar episode, might be in the midst of a schizophrenic episode, get themselves in trouble with the law, and we're not the ones that have called you. They've been picked up by the police. What can be done so that our family member might end up in a hospital setting rather than in jail?
A lot of times in that particular situation, it's probably been too late. They may have already committed a crime that now has brought that about. The part that is still important is having the contact with us. We recently had an incident where a young man was arrested by our department for driving without a license. He was brought back to our lockup facility, and while there, we did not know that he was in mental crisis. He was actually from the state of Minnesota, and he then took opportunity to try and attack the officer that was processing him in lockup. He tried to tackle him to the ground. The officer was able to subdue him, put him in handcuffs, and then place him in a holding facility. And at this time, we're then contacting the Lake County State's Attorney because what was simply a misdemeanor for driving without a license is now a felony for aggravated battery of a police officer. And so in that process, we were able to make contact with the mother in Minnesota, who then could inform us of this is not just normal behavior. Hey, my son's in Illinois and I didn't even know that. He's currently off medication, and that was extremely important for us to then be able to communicate with the state's attorney's office, who's discussing charges, and then his further care, so that he's not just going to lockup and being in holding with all kinds of others that have just committed a crime. There will be somebody there trying to help him get on his medication, as well as take care of the issue at hand, as far as the fact they've still committed a crime and are being punished as such. So again, it kind of comes down to the information, and information is power for us. The more that we have, the better we're able to handle any situation we get. So if you've heard, hey mom, Billy was just talking to me on the phone and he said he got arrested, it's more than worth your effort and time to make the phone calls to try to find out where, and then let the police know what the situation is, because he certainly probably isn't going to be telling us. So anything you can do for them is helpful.
Great, thank you. I'm going to throw it to, go ahead.
Can I just add to that as well, which is that I've had patients that have had that very experience where they did something while not doing well, and that they landed up in jail. And Tom Dart was so eloquent when he had said, I have the largest psychiatric system in the state of Illinois. So there actually is, if you have a family member that lands up in jail, there's a very specific phone number that you can call, where you can say, I have a friend, I have a family member, they're currently in jail, and they need psychiatric care. So you can call that number, and I've had a couple times of patients that have been jailed, and they were great about getting a social worker in to see that patient, and then getting a psychiatrist in to see that patient, getting them sometimes on medication, sometimes getting them transferred to Cermak, which is the psychiatric hospital next to 26th in California. So just if anybody needs that number, just so you know, it's 773-674-2273.
So that would be a Cook County number.
And so
So
that would be
this
Cook
happens
County,
in Cook
yes.
County. Okay. I'm going to throw I'm going to take the continuation of what Sergeant Hansen was talking about and throw it to Kevin. Tell us, if you would, a little bit about what mental health court is, at least in Lake County, in the event that our loved one does get picked up by the police in the midst of an episode.
Sure, yeah. Sometimes the fact that a person is arrested can actually be a very good thing for them. I mean, it's impossible to think of it in that light at first. However, there are some really great resources that can become available. One of those is definitely mental health courts. So in each of the counties, including Lake County that we've been discussing, there are specialty courts. One of them is mental health courts. So when a person is arrested, if their offense qualifies. Now, if it's a violent offense, which is very specifically defined, things like a person who commits a murder is not going to be eligible for mental health court. It's a specific kind of probation. Okay, so it's a diversion from prison or jail. Now, sometimes jail can be a sanction depending on how the person goes through that probation. For small periods of time, it's okay, well, you're not committed a new offense, you get in jail or something like that. But typically what mental health court entails is the person becomes eligible, and I would have to defer to their attorney as to whether their specific offense is going to be eligible for mental health court. But if it is, it can end up in either, certainly the diversion from prison or jail, but also sometimes it can end up in dismissal of charges depending on the type of case. And it's a specific, very intense kind of probation where there's a team 3 times the size of the panel that's sitting up here that sits around and talks about each individual case every single week, at least once a week. Sits around a table before court and talks about the person for at least 5 minutes. What their check-ins were with the probation officer, what their check-ins were with treatment folks, whether it be mental health professionals or drug treatment folks. As I think a lot of you probably know, is often whether it's comorbid disorders, whether the person is also dealing with addiction, or whether simply they even if it's not actual addiction, they're just dealing with substance abuse issues. A lot of times, unfortunately, they go hand in hand. That type of thing gets addressed. People address housing for the people. And so it's a very involved sort of probation where every week they're in court in front of the judge, and the judge talks to them in a much more informal way than you've probably would ever think about a judge speaking to a criminal, what is otherwise a criminal defendant. And same thing from our office. We have prosecutors who, sometimes that's me, but usually in mental health court specifically, it's usually 2 other prosecutors who are engaging with the person in a way you wouldn't expect a prosecutor to deal with a person who is charged with a crime. It's a great resource. So if you have a loved one who has a mental illness, is charged with a crime, it's absolutely something to try and pursue. Whether you think whether they can be the conduit to, and you would trust them to ask for it, because it's a voluntary. Nobody's ever going to be forced to be in mental health court. It's a voluntary program, but they might not know about it. So certainly I would encourage you to tell them about it if they're in that circumstance. If you don't trust them, to speak up about it, call their attorney. Call our office. Honestly, I mean, that may seem strange to call the office of the person who's prosecuting your son or your daughter or your friend, but I can assure you that our office is going to be willing to listen if it's an appropriate circumstance.
Great, thank you. I have a question here that I think I'm going to direct to Dr. Casey and Corey. It says, how can I get my potential bipolar 35-year-old son to see a doctor for therapy and medication? And I'm going to just sort of assume here that that person is not voluntarily seeking out help.
Well, certainly we would recommend trying to be encouraging. And then if that doesn't work, and because I work in the field of addictions so much, we look for leverage, truthfully. So that requires the family sometimes setting boundaries that we really love you, we want you to get this help, and if you choose not to, then we're not going to continue to pay your car, or because you're driving erratically and overly aggressive because you're unmedicated, etc. So trying to outline the consequences of the behavior and using what leverage you have to try to motivate towards treatment. But I say this it's always got to be done with love and compassion, so we're trying to appeal to them in terms of that you want them well. And I just had a phone call today, a young lady who's been off her medication for some time through her own volition, and we did get her away from alcohol and drugs, which was really making her unstable. Now she's broken up with a boyfriend, and she's destabilized. So remember I was saying about those early warning signs. So no medication, now the loss of an important relationship, and now she's really on the edge. And so the conversation was such as, is this a time when you might be willing to go to a different psychiatrist, get a reevaluation, engage in therapy with a therapist who can help you with your relationship issues? See, now she's motivated because she wants the relationship back.
Right.
And so that's what we mean by leverage. Like, where are the opportunities where you can get some buy-in? Corey, you have more you want to say?
Got it. Okay, thank you. Good advice. Here's a question, and I'm not sure if it belongs to the police or the state's attorney's office. Can a family take phone calls or voicemails from a manic child, son or daughter, who's not on meds, in order to petition the judge or the police about someone's illness to try to get them treatment? I guess it's a state attorney's question.
I'm curious.
So I want to make sure I understand the question properly. So if a person, say a daughter, calls a mother and leaves a manic voicemail, and you as the parent consider it to be evidence, essentially, I guess?
That's kind of what I'm hearing. Or if in the house, there's just lots of manic discussions and, maybe a bit of psychosis, can you sort of clandestinely be taping this without their permission and then use it for commitment
Got it.
purposes.
You know, there have been some changes in the law recently with respect to recording a person without their knowledge. And I don't want to say the wrong thing. That's a good question. I don't know the exact answer to that, whether you can kind of surreptitiously tape a person. If it's a person leaving a voicemail or calling you, or you can parrot what they say, absolutely, that's very helpful information. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure as far as the police is concerned as well. Frankly, sorry, maybe you know better than I do. You've been better trained as to what the specific law is right now as to when people can be taped, because I know you're subject every day to be videotaped and audio taped.
Right. So it is a hot button topic. Laws are evolving daily, I would say, in that regard. What I would say is there's going to be a difference between what we use that information for and how it can be used to maybe prosecute someone or get them petitioned. So on a domestic dispute a few months ago, all signs pointed to the son physically abusing his mother until he broke out his cell phone and said, "Oh no, watch this." And wow, yes, mom was the aggressor. Son did nothing but defend himself against a mom in a very manic state. That was news to us, and we come in with biases as well. You know, we see a strong young man and an older woman in her 50s that is not as strong as this young man, and we automatically are going to assume that she's telling us the truth. So in that case, that evidence, we're not going to be charging. I mean, obviously we have evidence to the contrary. Now, in court, are they going to use that to prosecute mom for domestic battery against her son? No, probably not. So it is a very fine line, but to say to us when we show up, hey, this is what I just recorded my daughter doing, and she's just out of control, we're going to take that information to say, hey, look, we understand what you're up against. Let's start pursuing something to get her the help that she needs.
So you transport them to the emergency room, and then you as family, as friends, show up with that recording. We will absolutely listen to that recording, right? And we will use that data in deciding if somebody needs to go inpatient or not. So where there's the legal aspect of it, where there's the legal aspect of that, from our end, we're trying to collect as much information as possible to decide what level of treatment that person needs. So and I've had that happen. I've literally had family members come in with recordings. The other thing we've had is emails, where families will capture emails or text messages and literally send those to us via email or bring those into the emergency room. And we'll absolutely use that data in deciding what needs to happen next.
Okay, thank you.
So the petition that you keep hearing about, I don't know, I can't recall from my opening remarks if I used that word. When I referred to paperwork, that's what I was talking about as well. So this is a copy of the petition that they're referring to. That's what gets filled out at our office as well. That is can be a very useful and important document. That has the effectiveness of asking the court to get the person involuntarily to the hospital. It's the same document that could be filled out by a police officer, by hospital staff. That's the same thing that kind of gets the ball rolling of keeping the person.
I think you put some copies of it
Yeah,
over
there's
on the
20
table.
copies back
Somebody
there.
did,
Yeah.
okay,
And you
so
can
if you
also-
want to see what it's like.
On that website that I was referring to, the DHS website, Department of Human Services for Illinois, there's copies of that. That's where I printed this off of.
Okay.
While I have them, another form that, has anybody ever heard of a declaration for mental health treatment? So it's way underused. Declaration for mental health treatment. It's also on the DHS website. What that is when a person with mental health, with a mental illness, is in a lucid state, has the capacity to recognize their illness and make reasonable and rational decisions. If they're willing, they can fill this out with you and authorize you to, when they decompensate, when they are no longer meeting that standard, no longer have the capacity to make a rational decision about their treatment. It gives you the power to do that and to act without coming to our office, without calling the police. You can go to the hospital and check a person in, which you can't normally do against their will. You can have a right to the person's medical records. You can get medications for the person and authorize that the person be medicated against their will if the person at a prior time when they had the capacity to authorize you to do so.
Great, it's good to know about that. Thank you.
It's a lot like a power of attorney. It's just much, much more specific to mental health treatment and medications and admittance into the hospital. Declaration, so it's again on the DHS website, Declaration for Mental Health Treatment. It's extremely specific, intuitive, fill-in PDF form. It's great.
Is that a temporary document though? How
So
long does that live?
Yeah, so it's so specific that you define, I want to say it goes up to 2 years.
So you
but
frame it out?
Exactly. The
Okay.
person worked to define exactly the time frame that this is going to be effective and revisit it every couple of years, basically.
Okay. We're going to move along here, but thank you for all that information. I saw a lot of people, including myself, taking notes. This question I'm going to ask Ray to answer. What do I do if my teen son has a friend who has been saying that he wants to die and tells my son not to tell anyone or he will commit suicide? You want to start with that
You
one?
need to intervene to save your life.
Okay, and what would that mean?
Call the other students' parents if they're under 18 and say, this is what's been expressed to me. If your son gets mad at you, tough, that's life. If he gets mad at the person, you save a life. You try to talk to anybody who's in that circle, what has he done? Is he starting to give things away? Is he talking about it? Is he becoming morbidly obsessed with death? Do everything you possibly can to help that kid help himself and his parents. And then if he decides to make a decision, nothing's going to stop him. In my experience, I've been out here 32 years, and I've lost 26 to suicide, 26 parents and kids. Some of the most horrible situations ever. But yet, do everything you possibly can to save their life.
Okay,
And knowing that you can't save their life.
thank you. Corey, you want to add anything to that?
I would just say be the bad guy as the parent. Just be the bad guy. Be the one that, my kid told me not to say anything and I'm saying it. And try to let your kid off the hook with your friend, but take the, your kid's asking for help too. They don't know what to do, and this other kid's asking for help too. So yeah, just be the bad guy in that situation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask you and Dr. Casey to hold. Casey, I got that right? Yeah. All of a sudden I had a little brain freeze there. It says here, some communities are offering the equivalent of a crash pad, a place to just chill and regroup, not a hospital setting. How effective are those facilities?
I would think that's a good question for NAMI. I can't speak with authority on that. I believe that I've heard that they are effective. It's sort of a calming place. It helps to bring people from an escalated state back to a place of stabilization. What we do know about the brain is that when there's a perception of threat, the amygdala huffs in and your executive functioning, your ability to make rational, logical decisions kind of goes offline. And so from what I understand about those safe places is it helps you to de-escalate, get your executive functioning back online so you could make more rational decisions. And
Okay.
the place that Ray has mentioned, that safe place for the kids to go to if they are feeling suicidal, kind of is that same sort of space where, you know, I impulsively feel like I want to go and take action. So let's sit down, let's think it through, let's just be calm. Also with mental health crisis, a lot of times it's overstimulation can aggravate and escalate. And so having a place that's safe and calming can help to bring that escalation down. So even when you're intervening during an escalation, and the police officer probably knows this, the most important thing is for you to stay calm. And so it's like bring your own executive functioning back online and don't be saying a lot of things, don't be screaming, don't be causing a lot of chaos. And so I hope that I did that justice.
Sounds very right to me. It sounds like anything we can do to try to de-escalate, and certainly a calming environment would be one of those things. Could be helpful, so thank you. We'll probably go back down to office to Sergeant Hansen and possibly even to Paul, sorry.
Okay.
What happens if a person in crisis where there's now an order for involuntary commitment refuses to go to the hospital or stay in the hospital or go with the officer?
If we have a situation where someone is clearly a danger to themselves or others, we're not going to finish that call until they end up at the hospital. But I will tell you, in 18 years of doing this, I've never had to go hands-on with, hands-on meaning I'm going to make you, we'll take the time to convince that loved one that they need to just get in the ambulance and go. The one way that we do that is a show of force and power. If there's 7 guys like myself standing there saying, look, you're gonna go either willingly or we're gonna make you, most times they're gonna eventually make the decision to go willingly. The other part of having 7 or 8 of us, and I don't know if you've seen some of our firemen, but they're good-sized boys, they're happy to help us. We can get them there without, if I have to, it's just me making them go, it's probably gonna get ugly. 7 of us can, each grab a limb and we're going to get them there. That's the way it's gonna end up going. If they have to go, they're gonna go. But we're very aware and cognizant of just not to do more damage to the situation. And we are gonna try and handle that with as much care as we can.
How about passing that down to Paul? So what happens if that situation happens in the emergency room and the person decides they're not going to go upstairs or wherever it is?
So in the emergency room, again, the way the police have been so great with trying to calm things down, figuring out what exactly does that person need in the moment that would help them calm down. So the reality is you're going to the hospital, or the reality is you're going from the emergency room to the inpatient unit. But be able to engage in a conversation with them about, so this is gonna happen no matter what. Is there something we can give you that would help you? Do you want an extra blanket? Do you want something to eat? Do you want to make a phone call? A lot of times just being able to connect with somebody, I'm starting to freak out because I don't know, I've never been inpatient before, and everybody's talking about putting me in a hospital, and my friends have been in a hospital, and I've just heard horror stories. Or I've Googled psychiatric hospital and I've read all these blogs, or there's a girl interrupted and one flew in a cuckoo's nest, and that's my impression of what a psychiatric hospital is. So sometimes I just need to know where I'm going and what do they actually do there. Well, actually there's groups all day long, and you'll also meet with counselors, and you'll meet with a psychiatrist, and you'll meet with a nurse, and you'll sleep there for about 6 to 7 days, and then you're gonna go home. So when you start to provide that information, a lot of times that can help somebody calm down. And sometimes that doesn't work, right? So then there's the ER physician as well as the nurse will offer medicine. So you're really starting to rev up. We want to get your heart rate down. We want to get your blood pressure down. We don't want things to turn aggressive. So medication to help calm somebody down. And then same situation, if it does move to a point of aggression, then the ER doc can order for security to step in. And hopefully that's the very last option, and that's rarely used. So we really have worked, there's an agenda across the United States from one end of the country to the other, which is zero restraints. Zero restraints, whether it's in the hospital, on the unit, zero restraints within the emergency room. We're not there yet, but if you actually look at the numbers over the last 10 years, that has decreased significantly.
Okay, great, thank you.
So also the next step beyond if a person just will not sign in voluntarily to stay at a hospital and needs to. The next step is the doctors filing that's their own version of the same exact petition that we keep referring to and sending it to the state attorney's office. And then we go forward with a hearing that happens also quickly, within 5 days it gets set. And that's a full-blown hearing. The doctor comes, in Lake County, comes to the courthouse. Often it's involving, we try to get family members to come in and testify as well, because that's usually the best source of the actual information. But the doctors actually come in, testify. The person is represented by a very capable attorney from the public defender's office. So whether they have the awareness of what's going on or not, they're represented very well, and their due process rights are honored. And it's not a slam dunk every time that we win those hearings, because they get fought by the public defender, because their liberty is at stake. But so what can be ordered is up to 90 days in the inpatient unit by the judge, with the doctors having the discretion to go that whole 90 days. Very rarely does that actually happen. There's not really, when you hear that people getting locked away for mental illness, that doesn't really exist in the United States anymore. So.
Okay, thank you. Not sure who this belongs to, so I'm going to ask it and you can volunteer. Hoarding is a form of OCD and anxiety disorder, okay? If the hoarder denies there is an issue, which is part of the illness, and refuses help, what can be done, especially when it has gone to the point where a house might be infested with mice and other creatures, and it is now becoming a health concern? Who wants to take that one? Oh, were you
We do get those kinds of calls a lot. The other thing is sometimes, similarly, we'll get to deal with aging. In the Barrington area is Council on the Aging. We can then start, once we get you need somebody else to see it. You're seeing it, you're right, but call us maybe just, if we can get inside and see it as well. And now it's starting to spill over to that again. They're almost a danger to themselves.
Right.
And then start the process rolling for getting them the help that they need through these other avenues.
Okay. Denise, did you have something on that?
Yeah, again, it's on this continuum, right? So if it's, the house is just overly full with things, that's something that therapeutically, we probably could do outpatient in a therapeutic setting. If it's, you can only walk down a path in the house and you can't sit on any of the furniture and every surface is cluttered, it would be eligible for Patrick McGrath's OCD interventions. And IOP or inpatient, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Right, obviously, the hoarding issue is not only an issue regarding anxiety, it also can be a dangerous issue. Because Dr. Casey was talking about a little bit ago, the concept of leverage, where it's so uncomfortable as a family or friend to have to do that. Calling the police, even calling the health department, and having the health department become involved, and there actually being some legal consequences. Sometimes is the wake-up call. There's a real popular term now, which is a long word, which psychology and psychiatry are infamous for, which is something called anosognosia. Has anybody heard the term anosognosia? They're starting to teach it in family to family, right?
Right.
And it's the idea that I don't see the impact of my symptoms. I don't see how my symptoms are impacting me, and I don't see how my symptoms are impacting the other people that I care about in my life. Hoarding is one of those in particular where I have denial. I'm blind to the impact this is having on my own personal health, on the health of the people that I'm living with. And so to know that that's a it's not intentional. It's not like I'm being blind to this and really have a hard time seeing how this is playing out and how it's impacting people. And know that in general, whether we have mental health issues, or whether we have hypertension, or whether we have diabetes, or whether we have asthma, we're about 30% compliant with what our doctors ask us to do. Human nature is to not be compliant. How many of you are doing everything the doctor asks you? So, as Dr. Casey was saying, on a continuum, right? So that, but know that, we tend to resist business, doing the things that we need to do to take care of us. But sometimes you might need to use that health leverage, that legal leverage,
Sure.
to say this is really serious. You're going to potentially lose your house unless there's some kind of movement here.
Okay, great, thank you. Here's kind of an interesting one. Would it help to have a de-escalation buddy for our family members if we can't get a hold of a counselor in a crisis? Okay, Paul, I see you nodding your head.
That's a great
I see
idea.
Denise reaching. So why don't we let Denise start it off, and then if you've got some extra thoughts, we'll go down there.
I think it's a brilliant plan, and one of the things we handed out was creating a plan. So a lot of the things that we're talking about could be plugged in here, and this would be a really nice thing to hand to the hospital or police, anybody that's going to be. But putting a buddy on there, like who is your go-to buddy? So like Ray was saying, in the old days, you had the 3 flat mouth family members, and you kind of knew who your safe person was to go to. And I love this question. It's like, who's the person that you can turn and run to? And so finding that, if you have it within your own family system, or a neighbor, or a school counselor, or a teacher, or a therapist. Well, you said if you can't reach your therapist, right?
But, okay.
But yeah, I think it's a brilliant plan to have a go-to person.
Paul?
Yeah, just that idea that either when the situation is starting to unfold, we have 2 different options. One is to react, right? And then when we react, we tend to be very emotional about that. So the idea of having a plan is ideal, because rather than reacting to my emotion and doing the best that I can, while my amygdala, which is the part of our brain that's all emotional, there's some research that's saying the higher the emotion gets, which is the amygdala, which is the emotional part of our brain, the higher that gets activated and is more active, the lower the front part of our brain goes in terms of activity. So it's kind of like this, right? The more emotional I get, the less I'm able to think through things. So having a plan in place is something I can look at and use reasoning and thoughtfulness and thinking it through. And, you know, there's a great comment, if you want to know if you're enlightened or not, go to a family party. Right? Because families have a way of punching buttons in us in a way that nobody else can. So to have some kind of outside source that is able to intervene, because a lot of times, you know, it's kind of like helping your kid with homework. Right? It just tends to not go very well.
Yeah.
You know, as patient as you are. So the idea of like sometimes having an outside person
Sure.
that can help calm the situation down.
Makes good sense. You've got the mic, so I'm going to ask you a question. How's that?
Can I just interject
Yeah,
this for a
certainly.
minute? I think the brilliance of that plan is when we get called and we show up, you'll have the person in a mental health crisis, and then oftentimes, I'll just be honest, the family member is in their own crisis, and they're making the situation so much worse. And the ability to have somebody else to bring in basically, not technical term, just in your sane moment and their sane moment, that you can agree is going to be that person. I think even the declaration for mental health treatment, if they've got someone in their life that they're gonna trust more than you, if you're oil and water with each other, especially when those situations get toxic, now we're really starting to think strategically and outside the box. I think that's a brilliant plan.
Great, thank you. So just hold on to that mic.
Sure.
Okay. Are you allowed, as a police officer, if we have a family member who's living in your town, and we're a little concerned about what might be going on in that house, but they're not calling us, and they don't want us coming over, can we call you and ask you to go do a check?
Absolutely, and we do that quite regularly. And it's just called a well-being check. And I've gone on them where we've found a person that's passed away because family members haven't heard from them like they're supposed to, and gone on them when, you know, we get there and they have a story to tell us is exactly why they're not contacting that family member. But we are able to try to work together to say, hey, really, I get what you're saying and why you're not contacting them, but can I at least call them and tell them that you are safe, and to work with those. But that's more than, it's something that happens on a very regular basis for us.
Great. I'm going to ask you one other right here. What is the definition of being in harm's way? or a danger to self and others? What kinds of things do we have to see in order to be able to tell you that when we call 911?
I would say if you're even asking yourself that question, call 911. The bottom, I would tell you, 95 times in 100, we get called later than we should have been. We could have, we get there and they start describing what the day has been like since they got home from school at 4 o'clock, and it's now 10 o'clock at night, and at about 4:30, maybe you should have called. As soon as you're wondering, are they a danger to themselves or others, call us and we would really much rather get there too early than too late. And too late doesn't have to mean even something really bad has happened. It just can mean that you're no longer operating at 100%. They weren't when and haven't been for a very long time. Too soon is I don't think something that we see.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just got to make a comment. You got great panelists here. We need somebody from the ER areas of these hospitals. That's where the biggest problem is. They're releasing people that shouldn't be released. I've been told that if I had video film of a loved one that was concerned for taking a life, I had been hit myself and so forth, released her.
So let's take that question or that comment, thank you for it, and ask, and I'm going to go to Paul on this one. What do we do as a family member when we take someone to the ER, and I'm going to say we were able to get them there,
Yes.
or they have been hospitalized in a behavioral health unit, and we get the call saying, we're going to be releasing your child, your husband, your mother tomorrow, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, we can't handle this. What do we do?
It's a real common dilemma that I hear on both sides. I hear from the family side, and I also hear from the case manager side. As you were saying a little bit earlier, the release that that patient has to sign says that there's an exchange between information, but that doesn't mean you can't call. So will our case managers, so once you're on an inpatient unit, not just at Alexian, anywhere, you're assigned a case manager, right? And that case manager is responsible for coordinating your care while on the unit, as well as follow-up care. Are you going to go to a partial program after? Are you going to go to a halfway house after, or residential, or follow up with outpatient therapy? And you are very welcome to call and get that case manager's name and leave as much information as you want on the voicemail. I said I want to address that piece, which is so that where they may not be able to call you back if there is no release sign, you can leave as much information as you want. And sometimes people will call and they'll leave information, and then what'll happen is you'll get an additional phone call while they are on the unit, so you'll have more information. Leave another voicemail message. So leave that information, and you're absolutely right. It really is an error, a mistake, a problem in the system that somebody can land up in an emergency room, and you provide the information, and that emergency room personnel, mental health professionals may make that decision to release them. And the best I can say is be persistent.
Well, knowing about the state's attorney options, what I learned tonight.
Yeah,
Because I didn't know that.
And so it's also, if you've ever heard of HIPAA, HIPAA, I understand. I understand the intention. We're all entitled to privacy as much as we want. We should have it. But I find it extremely troubling that there can't be, in so many circumstances, a two-way information exchange. The doctors are simply not allowed, in almost all these circumstances, to share information that's considered protected health information, anything that would reveal a diagnosis or that would reveal anything considered to be personal health information related to the person. But I 100% reiterate what you're saying And that doesn't mean you can't give them information. Write it down, tell them, email them, leave messages, absolutely. Whether it's the doctors, often it's the social workers that are dealing on a many times a day basis with these people when they're at least from my perspective, I'm hearing about people being inpatient or in the ER. Share all the information that you can, the medications that they're taking, what you anticipate is going to happen based on past activity, what happened in that specific acute circumstance. That's always going to be helpful to the medical professional dealing with.
Thank you.
And just real quickly, every single hospital, whether it's medical or psychiatric, has a patient advocate. Right, but that patient advocate is not just for the patient. That patient advocate is for you as a friend or a family member. So call the hospital and say, I want to know who the patient advocate is. And there's the boundary as a patient advocate is a little bit looser.
Okay.
There's a little bit freer information exchange because the patient advocate is not a clinician in the role. So the HIPAA rules shift a little bit, and there's a little bit more information you can sometimes get from a patient advocate than you can get from a clinician, which I know it seems absurd.
NAMI envisions a time or world where all persons with mental illnesses experience resilience, recovery, and wellness. And we hope that what we learned here tonight can provide each of us with some of the tools that helps that vision become a reality. I thank everybody for attending tonight. Thank you to the panelists. We'll see you next time, I hope.